The race dictator is first. Chris Butt is P4. Todd is third. Chris Butt in back straight is P4. Todd is third. YH8 Racing is fifth on mediums. Chris Butt is P4. Best lap is a 6:51.716. The race dictator in roller coaster is P1. Chris Butt in South Bend is P4 on mediums. The race dictator in NASCAR Bend is first. Todd in South Bend is third. The race dictator in Oak Tree is P1 on mediums. YH8 Racing in back straight is fifth on mediums. Todd is fourth on mediums. Chris Butt is 4th. Best lap is a 1:55.041. The Mill is P2. Todd in Oak Tree is 5th. YH8 Racing in Oak Tree is P3 on mediums. Best lap is a 1:51.833. Chris Butt in Horseshoe is P4. The Race Dictator is 1st. Best lap is a 1:48.633. Todd in Snake is P2. Best lap is a 1:49.545. YH8 Racing in Snake is 4th. That Canadian guy from Canada is P6 on mediums. Todd from New Zealand is P2. That Canadian guy is P6. The Race Dictator is 1st on mediums. Todd is 2nd. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is P7 on mediums. The Mill from New Zealand in Oak Tree is 3rd. Chris Butt in Horseshoe is 5th. Best lap is a 152.296. The Mill in Hogpen is 3rd. The qualification session is at Virginia International Raceway in Alton, Virginia, USA. Jason Short from New Zealand is first on mediums. Chris Butt from New Zealand in Horseshoe is 5th on mediums. That Canadian guy from Canada is P4 on mediums. Jason Short in Oak Tree is 2nd. Todd from New Zealand in Back Straight is 5th on mediums. The Mill from New Zealand in Back Straight is P7 on mediums. Jason Short is first. 10 minutes remaining in the session. Jason Short is up 7.59 in left hook. Jason Short is up 7.91 in South Bend. Jason Short is up 8.31 in roller coaster. YH8 Racing is provisional pole with a 150.640. Jason Short improved his P2 with a 150.928. .288 off pole. That Canadian guy is provisional pole with a 149.431. Todd is 5th. Todd improved his P4 with a 152.794. 3.363 off pole. Jason Short is P3. Jason Short is up 0.56 in left hook. Jason Short is up 0.66 in south bend. Jason Short is up 0.79 in roller coaster. Jason Short is provisional pole with a 148.602. Todd is 8th up 3.56. Todd improved his 4th with a 149.251. 0.649 off pole. The mill is P6. The mill improved his P6 with a 150.582. 1.980 off pole. Jason Short is first up 0.20. YH8 Racing in Oak Tree is P5 up 0.53 on mediums. Five minutes remaining in the session. YH8 Racing is up 0.55 in roller coaster. The Race Dictator from New Zealand is third up 0.44 on mediums. The Race Dictator is provisional pole with a 148.479. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is 7th up 0.10 on mediums. Chris Butt in roller coaster is 8th up 0.27. Johnny Prince from New Zealand in Oak Tree is 7th up 0.41. Johnny Prince is up 0.76 in roller coaster. Johnny Prince improved his P6 with a 150.370. 1.891 off pole. That Canadian guy from Canada in roller coaster is P3 up 0.49. That Canadian guy is provisional pole with a 148.404. The mill from New Zealand is 7th up 0.98. The mill improved his 5th with a 149.349. 0.945 off pole. Jason Short in Snake is 3rd up 0.14. Jason Short is up 0.26 in Oak Tree. Jason Short is up 0.24 in Roller Coaster. Jason Short is provisional pole with a 148.258. Chris Butt in back straight is P8 up 0.63. Chris Butt is up 0.90 in Hog Pen. The qualifying session is now in overtime. YH8 Racing is 6th up 0.37. YH8 Racing is up 0.67 in back straight. YH8 Racing is up 0.60 in Hog Pen. YH8 Racing improved his 4th with a 148.865. 0.607 off pole. Chris Butt in Roller Coaster is 8th on mediums. Best lap is a 152.293. 4.035 off pole. Chris Butt is up 0.17 in Hog Pen. Chris Butt improved his P8 with a 151.649. 3.391 off pole. Broadcast bot is 20th. The race session is at Virginia International Raceway in Alton, Virginia, USA. Jason Short is first. That Canadian guy from Canada is P2 on mediums. The race dictator from New Zealand is third on mediums. 30 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. The race dictator lost third to YH8 Racing. Jason Short from New Zealand in Horseshoe is P2 on mediums. Jason Short passed that Canadian guy for P1. That Canadian guy is P2. The race dictator is P3. That Canadian guy is P2. The race dictator in back straight is third. That Canadian guy in roller coaster is P2. The race dictator in hog pen is second. The race dictator lost fourth to YH8 Racing. The race dictator lost fifth to Todd. That Canadian guy in Horseshoe is second, 0.9 behind Jason Short. YH8 Racing in NASCAR Bend is fourth on mediums, 0.5 behind the mill. That Canadian guy in Snake is second, 0.8 behind Jason Short. The mill from New Zealand in South Bend is P3 on mediums, 0.6 ahead of YH8 Racing. That Canadian guy in back straight is second, 0.2 behind Jason Short. The race dictator in back straight is P6, 0.7 behind Todd. That Canadian guy from Canada in hog pen is second, 0.3 ahead of the mill. The mill is P3 on mediums, 0.3 behind that Canadian guy. The mill was 0.9 faster last lap. YH8 Racing is P4, 0.4 behind the mill. The mill is P3, 0.5 ahead of YH8 Racing. The mill was 0.6 faster last lap. YH8 Racing is fourth, 0.3 behind the mill. The mill was 0.6 faster last lap. The mill in Oak Tree is P3, 0.5 ahead of YH8 Racing. "25 minutes remaining in the session. YH8 Racing in back straight is P4, 0.6 ahead of Todd. That Canadian guy is second, 0.9 behind Jason Short. YH8 Racing is P4. Best lap is a 150.669. 0.846 off the fastest lap. That Canadian guy in Horseshoe is P2, 0.9 behind Jason Short. The mill in Left Hook is P3, 0.8 behind that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is P2, 0.6 behind Jason Short. YH8 Racing is P4, 0.3 ahead of the Race Dictator. That Canadian guy in back straight is P2, 0.3 behind Jason Short. YH8 Racing in Roller Coaster on lap 4 is P4, 0.1 ahead of the Race Dictator. The Race Dictator in Hog Pen is P5, 0.4 behind YH8 Racing. The Race Dictator is now P4. YH8 Racing is third, 0.1 ahead of the Race Dictator. YH8 Racing lost third to the Race Dictator. The Race Dictator in NASCAR Bend is P3, 1.0 behind the mill. The Race Dictator was 1.0 faster last lap. That Canadian guy exiting pits on hards. Todd from New Zealand is sixth on mediums, 1.2 behind Johnny Prince. The Race Dictator in Oak Tree on lap 5 is P3, 1.8 behind the mill. Todd from New Zealand in back straight is P5, 0.4 behind Johnny Prince. Johnny Prince was 7.9 faster last lap. The Race Dictator in Hog Pen is third, 1.3 behind the mill. Todd is P5 on mediums, 0.3 behind Johnny Prince. The race dictator from New Zealand in NASCAR Bend is P3, 1.0 behind the mill. Todd in left hook is P5, 0.1 behind Johnny Prince. 20 minutes remaining in the session. Todd lost P5 to YH8 Racing. The race dictator in South Bend is third, 0.6 behind the mill. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is P5 on mediums, 0.1 behind YH8 Racing. Johnny Prince lost 5th to Todd. The race dictator in back straight is third, 0.8 behind the mill. Todd in roller coaster is P5, 0.5 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator is third, 0.6 behind the mill. Todd is P5, 0.4 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator in Snake is P3, 0.9 behind the mill. Todd in Snake is P5, 0.9 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator in Oak Tree is P3, 0.5 behind the mill. YH8 Racing is P5, 0.6 behind Todd. Chris Butt from New Zealand in back straight is P7 on mediums, 0.5 behind Johnny Prince. The race dictator in Hog Pen is third, 0.6 behind the mill. YH8 Racing is P3, 0.6 ahead of the mill. That Canadian guy is fourth on hards, 4.9 ahead of the mill. The mill exiting pits on mediums. The race dictator exiting pits on mediums. YH8 Racing in Snake is P3 on mediums, 0.7 behind Todd. Chris Butt exiting pits on mediums. Johnny Prince exiting pits on mediums. Todd is P2, 0.3 behind Jason Short. YH8 Racing on lap 8 is P3, 0.2 behind Todd. Todd was 1.1 faster last lap. Todd is second, 0.3 ahead of YH8 Racing. YH8 Racing in back straight is P3, 0.5 behind Todd. "15 minutes remaining in the session. Todd in back straight on lap 8 is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. YH8 Racing in back straight is P3, 0.3 behind Todd. Todd on lap 8 is P2, 0.4 ahead of YH8 Racing. YH8 Racing is P3, 0.3 behind Todd. The Mill is P2, 0.4 ahead of Chris Butt. Chris Butt is P3. Best lap is a 150.334. 1.851 off the fastest lap. Todd exiting pits on mediums. Jason Short exiting pits on mediums. YH8 Racing exiting pits on mediums. The Mill in Snake is second, 0.9 behind that Canadian guy. Johnny Prince is fourth, 0.2 ahead of the race dictator. Johnny Prince was 20.9 faster last lap. The Mill is second. Best lap is a 149.487. 1.004 off the fastest lap. The race dictator in back straight is fourth on mediums, 0.1 behind Johnny Prince. The race dictator passed Johnny Prince for P3. Johnny Prince is fourth, 0.2 ahead of Chris Butt. Chris Butt is P5. YH8 Racing is P7. Best lap is a 149.910. 1.427 off the fastest lap. Chris Butt is fifth, 1.0 behind Johnny Prince. The Mill is second. The race dictator is third, 0.5 behind the Mill. The Mill in South Bend is P2, 0.5 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator in Oak Tree is third, 0.5 behind the Mill. That Canadian guy in back straight is second battling the Mill. That Canadian guy passed the mill for P1. Chris Butt in back straight on lap 10 is P4, 0.3 ahead of YH8 Racing. 10 minutes remaining in the session. Chris Butt is now P3. YH8 Racing in back straight is 4th, 0.1 ahead of the race dictator. YH8 Racing lost P4 to the race dictator. YH8 Racing lost P5 to the mill. Chris Butt is P3. Chris Butt is now P4. The mill is second, 0.1 ahead of the race dictator. Todd entering the pits is P8. The race dictator in horseshoe is third, 0.4 ahead of Chris Butt. Todd exiting pits on mediums. Chris Butt in left hook is P4. The mill is P2, 0.7 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator is P3 on mediums, 0.5 behind the mill. Chris Butt in back straight is 4th, 0.7 ahead of Jason Short. The mill in roller coaster is P2. The race dictator in hog pen is third, 0.7 ahead of Chris Butt. The mill in horseshoe is P2, 0.8 behind that Canadian guy. Jason Short in NASCAR Bend is 4th, 0.3 ahead of Chris Butt. The race dictator in Snake is P3, 0.7 behind the mill. YH8 Racing is 6th, 0.3 behind Chris Butt. The mill in back straight is second, 0.6 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator in back straight is P3, 0.6 behind the mill. Jason Short is 4th, 1.0 behind the race dictator. Jason Short was 0.5 faster last lap. Jason Short is now P2. YH8 Racing is P4, 0.6 behind Chris Butt. Chris Butt from New Zealand is P3, 0.5 ahead of YH8 Racing. 5 minutes remaining in the session. YH8 Racing in Snake is 4th. Jason Short is 2nd, 2.6 behind that Canadian guy. YH8 Racing in back straight is 4th, 0.3 behind Chris Butt. Chris Butt in back straight is 4th. The race dictator in Hog Pen is P5 on mediums, 2.7 behind Chris Butt. Chris Butt in Horseshoe is P4, 1.4 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator is P5, 1.7 behind Chris Butt. Jason Short is P2 on mediums, 2.0 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator in back straight is 5th, 0.1 behind Chris Butt. The race dictator passed Chris Butt for P4. Chris Butt in back straight is P5 on mediums, 0.9 behind the race dictator. The race dictator was 2.1 faster last lap. Jason Short is P2 on mediums, 2.0 behind that Canadian guy. Chris Butt in Horseshoe is P5, 1.3 behind the race dictator. Jason Short is P2, 2.0 behind that Canadian guy. Chris Butt is P5, 1.9 behind the race dictator. Jason Short in back straight is P2, 1.5 behind that Canadian guy. Jason Short was 0.8 faster last lap. The race dictator is 4th, 2.7 ahead of Chris Butt. Jason Short in Horseshoe is second, 1.0 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator in NASCAR Bend is P4, 1.8 behind YH8 Racing. Jason Short from New Zealand is second, 0.6 behind that Canadian guy. Jason Short was 0.8 faster last lap. The race dictator on lap 16 is fourth, 1.3 behind YH8 Racing. Jason Short from New Zealand in back straight is second, 0.7 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator in roller coaster is P4 on mediums, 0.6 behind YH8 Racing. The leader has just finished the race. That Canadian guy finished P1. Jason Short finished P2. YH8 Racing finished third. The race dictator finished fourth. Chris Budd finished fifth. Johnny Prince finished P6. The Mill finished P7. Todd finished P8. Announcer bot is active. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is first on mediums. The race dictator from New Zealand is first on softs. Jason Short from New Zealand is third on softs. The race dictator is P1. Chris Bunnett from New Zealand in turn 3 is fourth on softs. That Canadian guy is fifth on softs. Chris Bunnett in Rahal Strait is second. The race dictator in turn 3 is fourth. Johnny Prince is fifth. That Canadian guy is second. Jason Short in the corkscrew is P1. Best lap is a 2:01.811. YH8 Racing in turn 10 is P4 on mediums. That Canadian guy in Rahal Strait is P3. Todd from New Zealand in the corkscrew is fifth on softs. That Canadian guy in turn 11 is fourth. Chris Bunnett is P5 on softs. Jason Short in the corkscrew is P1. Best lap is a 1:34.403. Todd is P6. Jason Short is P1. Best lap is a 1:33.485. Johnny Prince is P2. Best lap is a 1:37.283. Jason Short in turn 6 is first. Chris Butt in Andretti hairpin is P8. Todd is P8. Chris Butt in turn 6 is P6. Todd is P7. Jason Short in Rahal Straight is first. Best lap is a 1:32.495. The race dictator is P3. Best lap is a 4:54.477. Johnny Prince is third. Best lap is a 1:36.941. YH8 Racing in turn 5 is 8th. Chris Butt in Rainy Curve is 6th on softs. The Mill from New Zealand is P3 on mediums. Best lap is a 1:36.790. Todd in turn 11 is P2. Best lap is a 1:33.732. YH8 Racing in Andretti hairpin is 8th. race dictator from New Zealand in Andretti hairpin is 6th. Best lap is a 1:40.282. Johnny Prince is P5. The race dictator in Rahal Straight is 6th. Todd is P2. Best lap is a 1:33.118. Jason Short in Andretti hairpin is first on softs. Best lap is a 1:32.214. The race dictator in turn 3 is P5. Best lap is a 1:35.072. The mill in turn 4 is 6th. Chris Butt is 3rd. Best lap is a 1:33.802. Johnny Prince in Rainy Curve is 7th. Todd in turn 4 is P2. Best lap is a 1:32.590. The mill in Andretti hairpin is P7 on mediums. The race dictator is P5. That Canadian guy is P4. Best lap is a 1:34.909. YH8 Racing is P8. Best lap is a 1:37.660. Todd from New Zealand is 2nd. Chris Butt is P3. Jason Short is P1. YH8 Racing in turn 10 is P8. Johnny Prince in turn 10 is P6. Best lap is a 1:35.629. Todd in turn 5 is second. Chris Butt in turn 10 is fourth. Best lap is a 1:33.204. Todd from New Zealand is second. That Canadian guy is third. Best lap is a 1:33.200. YH8 Racing in turn 11 is P7 on mediums. Best lap is a 1:35.801. Jason Short in turn 10 is P1. Best lap is a 1:31.857. The Mill is P8. Best lap is a 1:35.977. Todd in turn 5 is third. Jason Short is first. Todd is P3. YH8 Racing in the corkscrew is 7. The Mill in Andretti hairpin is P5. Best lap is a 1:34.001. Jason Short is first. The mill in turn 6 is fifth. That Canadian guy in Andretti hairpin is P2. Best lap is a 1:32.406. Todd is third. Jason Short is first. Best lap is a 1:31.774. YH8 Racing is P8. Jason Short is P1. Todd in turn 11 is third on softs. Jason Short is first on softs. Todd from New Zealand is P3. Jason Short in turn 5 is first. Best lap is a 1:31.243. Todd in rainy curve is P3 on softs. The mill is fifth. Todd in turn 3 is third. The mill is fifth. Todd in the corkscrew is third. is 5th on mediums. Jason Short in Andretti hairpin is P1. The mill in turn 4 is P5. That Canadian guy in turn 3 is P3. Best lap is a 1:32.313. The mill in rainy curve is P5. Jason Short is first. That Canadian guy is P3. The mill is 5th. Best lap is a 1:33.735. Jason Short in the corkscrew is P1. The qualification session is at Mazda Raceway Laguna Seca in Monterey, USA. That Canadian guy is P1 on softs. The race dictator from New Zealand is first on softs. Jason Short from New Zealand in turn 3 is second on softs. The race dictator is P1. The mill from New Zealand is P5 on mediums. The race dictator in turn 11 is first. Jason Short is 5th. Jason Short is up 16.28 in turn 4. Jason Short is up 16.48 in turn 6. Five minutes remaining in the session. Jason Short is up 16.84 in turn 10. That Canadian guy is P4. The race dictator in turn 3 is P4 up 0.11. That Canadian guy is third up 0.47 on softs. Jason Short from New Zealand in the corkscrew is P1 up 0.25. Jason Short is provisional pole with a 131.413. That Canadian guy is third. That Canadian guy improved his second with a 132.136. 0.723 off pole. Jason Short is first up 0.11. That Canadian guy is third up 0.19. That Canadian guy is up 0.21 in Rahal Straight. That Canadian guy is up 0.02 in turn 10. Jason Short is first. Jason Short is provisional pole with a 131.300. Todd from New Zealand in turn 11 is P2 up 0.23 on softs. The Mill from New Zealand is fifth up 0.15. The Mill is up 0.66 in the corkscrew. The Mill is up 1.19 in turn 11. improved is fourth with a 132.937, 1.637 off pole. The mill is up 0.02 in turn 3. The qualifying session is now in overtime. That Canadian guy is P3. Best lap is a 132.136. 0.836 off pole. Jason Short in turn 4 is P1. Best lap is a 131.300. Broadcast bot is 20th on mediums. The race session is at Mazda Raceway Laguna Seca in Monterey, USA. Jason Short is first. Todd from New Zealand is second on softs. That Canadian guy is third on softs. The Mill from New Zealand is fourth on mediums. Race start. Todd is P2. That Canadian guy in turn 3 is P3. Todd in turn 5 is second. The Mill in turn 6 is fourth. Todd in Rainy Curve is P2. The race dictator from New Zealand is P5 on softs. Todd is second, 0.6 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is fifth, 0.6 behind the mill. The mill is P4, 0.7 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator in turn 6 on lap 2 is P5, 0.8 behind the mill. The mill in rainy curve is P4. Best lap is a 144.049. 4.090 off the fastest lap. 5 minutes remaining in the session. That Canadian guy in turn 11 is third on softs, 0.5 behind Todd. The mill is fourth, 0.6 behind that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is P3, 0.4 behind Todd. Todd in turn 5 is third. Best lap is a 136.305. 4.790 off the fastest lap. The mill in Rahal Straight is fourth, 0.5 behind Todd. The mill was 2.9 faster last lap. Todd in rainy curve is third, 0.7 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator is fifth, 1.0 behind the mill. Todd is third, 0.8 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator is fifth on softs, 1.4 behind the mill. Todd is third, 1.3 behind that Canadian guy. The mill in the corkscrew is P4. Best lap is a 133.401. 2.083 off the fastest lap. The race dictator is fifth, 1.7 behind the mill. The mill in Andretti hairpin is fourth on mediums, 1.2 ahead of the race dictator. race dictator in turn 4 is P5, 1.4 behind the mill. The mill in turn 6 is 4th, 1.8 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator in the corkscrew on lap 5 is P5, 1.9 behind the mill. Todd is P3, 4.5 ahead of the mill. The mill is 5th. Todd is P3. Best lap is a 1:32.873. 1.627 off the fastest lap. The mill in turn 5 is 5th, 0.2 behind the race dictator. Jason Short from New Zealand in rainy curve on lap 6 is P1 on softs. The leader has just finished the race. Jason Short finished first. That Canadian guy finished second. Todd finished third. Bill finished fourth. The race dictator finished fifth. Broadcast bot is P6.